Well, welcome to Right Talk Wednesday. I'm your host, Kit Kelstow, and I am here today with Taedis, an author and an archivist in the science community. This will kind of bookend our other interview that we have done this season with Aborigin, and I'm hoping to learn more about this community and learn more about this writing, which is something that I have not known about until these interviews. So I'm very excited to always learn something new and learn about a new genre. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I did just a really high level overview. Before we dive in, is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers or listeners?
Um, I've been writing all my life. I haven't been doing it that successfully until about 9 or 10 years ago, where I started actually getting stories completed. Um, I have been interested on some level with size as long as I can remember. Um, I have found a very comfortable niche developing stories around the things that I love.
Wonderful. I'm always happy to hear that. I think one of the best things any writer could do is to write the stories they love and develop that niche. So I am so happy to hear that. And what fascinated me about our conversations that we had here before the interview is that you have talked about science and academia ignoring macrophilia, um, and the fact that sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment, but the fact that you are actually an archivist and a historian of this work. So I guess let's kind of start there because we probably have listeners or viewers who aren't familiar with the sci genre. Could you just kind of give us a bit of an overview of the writing that you do and how you see that genre? And I know that's a really broad question.
Fair enough. For me, um, there are certain elements of size disparity, and it'll start with I think we are required by law to say that macrophilia literally means lover of large. I think every time I see the word in anything more than a passing phrase, it is said that way. Um, Essentially, people who have this interest are interested in extreme outside the norm size differences. That might be Incredible Shrinking Man scale. That might be Attack of the 50-foot woman. Um, Higher or lower than that. Um, it is an interest in that disparity. For me personally, a lot of that has to do with power dynamics. It, to some extent, gender power dynamics also that come out in my writing, but it isn't exclusively that. And I do know some people in the community who do not relate to it in that way. Majority of my writing is adult content, erotic, where that power disparity is turned in a way that leads to um, some sort of power domination, female-male domination of the other partner. Not all of it. I do have some safe for work material. I have a book that my father and mother-in-law have read and enjoy. Um, I am not open with everyone in my life about what I write, but there are the people who are closest to me, family, close friends, know that I'm involved with the genre, and I speak with them as much as they're willing to talk to me about it.
That's a great overview, and I'm glad you defined that term. I was able to put the Latin together there for lover of large in my brain, but I'm glad you defined that for our listeners and viewers who may not be quite as familiar with academia speak as other people have. And I'm also happy that you mentioned like the power dynamics and gender dynamics of that. Um, Something that my personal work has been involved in, actually with my graduate studies right now, is looking at feminist theology and looking at various aspects of that. And I trying to think how to word this, but I'm wondering if there is some aspect in this writing of using the size dynamic to explore communities that are seen as other or as non-normative.
Oh, definitely. There are um, several people who I know in the community who are from minority groups, neurodivergent, uh, trans in various levels. I myself am bi gender. Um, there are, I'm just, pardon me for the pause here. I'm just trying to think of the number of people who I have met face to face in the community who don't stand in the usual um, round hole cliche, and it is usually there are very few people who actually in the community who I think actually fit into a traditional expectation of cis het. Uh, they it is interesting that you bring up feminist theory. One of the things that I've noticed looking through some of the imagery, um, going back several decades or centuries, the number of times women are presented in a reduced or enlarged capacity depending on the fears of the time. Um, there was actually a part of what I do as an archivist is physically collect materials, and that gets into a lot of rabbit holes of nerddom that I could talk about for way longer than we're going to have here. Comic books, movies, um, and oddly enough, vintage postcards. Um, I have some examples here. They, this is actually something that is common enough in vintage postcards. They have a term for it, superior man, tiny, sorry, superior woman, tiny man. And there are a whole series of them. I don't know how all this will show up on the video here, but I apologize for the glare. This was some of the cards from one series that came out in 1911. And this is another that came out the same year. And actually, I don't have a copy of the one here that I'm going to reference just now, but at one point at a convention, um, we recreated one. I was the tiny man, and one of the other attendees was the giant woman, and we had a gentleman there with a green screen who was able to do the size effect and take the picture and modify things. So that was a very cool moment in our lives. Um, I don't have it here, but there's a fairly famous image from Puck um, concerning the suffragette movement, where you could just see from the knee down of a woman sweeping through an area, trying to be stopped by the various men representing different factions, industry, government, the church. Um, I'm not I'm not going to say that size is perfectly and always feminist, but there have been some feminist leanings, and certainly the people who I know who are writing in this field are concerned about um, equality across the board.
That's fascinating. I'm so glad you shared those images with us. And um, I think it's interesting. I mean, a lot of us write for enjoyment and because we like telling stories, but I think that the messages and the worldviews that we can convey behind our writing, I think is so important. Um, I also kind of want to touch a little bit, and I don't want to diminish the erotic or sexual aspects of these stories because I myself write erotic romance, so like I'm totally cool with that. But um, I'm also interested. It sounds like there's also a large component of this genre that doesn't involve adult content that you could find, um, in other genre or yeah, other genres or other types of stories. And I don't know if you're able to talk a little bit about that as well.
Oh, certainly. And one thing I would like to touch on, um, there actually are several subgroupings of um, size and size writing and size fantasy. There are many people who do not go into the erotic side at all. It is uh, sweet, gentle, G-rated. Think Ariety. Think Indian in the cupboard, where they're just the dynamic doesn't take a sexual element. And one thing I have said to some people I've had some discussions with who are on that side is that um, because there can be some miscommunication, uh, just because I happen to have fantasies that go in that direction doesn't mean that every time I see an image that portrays size in some way, I am necessarily going to take it to a sexual place. I think the easiest way I've described it is say you're sexually attracted to women. A picture of a pinup model is going to hit you differently than the Mona Lisa or girl with a pearl earring. Um, it isn't necessarily always going to be a sexual thing. That being said, a good deal of my work does tend to go that way. So if you are going to explore any of my writings, just I try to be very mindful of that. I I honestly don't want anyone reading anything they don't want to read, and whatever I need to communicate that ahead of time. Um, as far as the rest of your question, I apologize. I got a little lost in that train of thought. Could you rephrase it a little bit? I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, that's totally okay. Just thinking, could you ex and you already kind of answered that a little bit as well, but talk a little bit more about some of the aspects of the size genre that are more on that sweet and gentle side, if you can.
Certainly. From my own experience, um, when I when I say size goes back as far as I can remember, uh, I remember being a very small child, uh, getting bathed by my grandmother on Saturday nights, and just having this terrified notion that when she pulled the plug out, that I would be sucked down in there. And there was actually a Mr. Rogers song that I heard uh, that you can never go down the drain. You can find it on YouTube. It it helped a lot when I was a kid. A few years later, um, when I was playing with my Star Wars action figures and my Micronauts, um, I wanted to get down at their scale. I wanted to be able to play with them and be able to have adventures in Luke's land speeder and the hydrocopter and all this other stuff. Because when you're 7, 8 years old, you can't actually drive a real car. You can't have these real adult toys. But if I could somehow get down there with them, I'd be able to have fun. And there are a lot of people I know who have come up to me or we in the course of conversation who've mentioned their first interest in size predates their sexual bent towards it. And to this day, there's still a divide for me. I love reading Atom comics from the 60s as what they are. And sometimes, yeah, I'll take a little play with that, but I don't know if that answers your question fully or
Yeah, no, that's great. And that's an interesting perspective because yeah, you could there's a difference, I think, in, directing, directing the play as far as, being a kid, you want to be in Star Wars, you want to be in these worlds. And I think there's a difference in like moving the toys around and actually being in the toys. There's an agency there, I think. That would be interesting. So no, that's very good. So I always like to pause a little bit in the interviews and um, I will put your links in the show notes and everything. But just real quick, if we do have listeners or viewers who are interested in your work, could you just tell them where to find out more?
yes, I have an Amazon page. Uh, Link can be in the description. I have a an eJunkies page, which I kind of try to push people a little more towards. It's hard to self-publish outside of Amazon, but I I'm not as supportive of them as I would be comfortable with. And I've taken some steps to reduce my footprint there, but it's difficult. Um, I have a DeviantArt page where I post some of the historical images and some of my stories. And I have a very poorly maintained blog that I'm going to need to start porting over to DeviantArt or some other place at some point.
Great. And they can just search Taedis, Taedis on those sites to find your information.
Yes.
Okay.
With you might need to do a little bit of filtering on Amazon just to avoid the Taedis. That'll come up all the time. But that's how I got my pen name. My literal typo on an old Royal manual typewriter back in the late 80s.
That's great. No, there's a typo I make when I type my name and I'm always like, maybe I should do something with that. So no, that's cool. Okay. So since you do have books, um, I guess that would be a good question. Do you write more like novel length stories or do you write shorter works?
Mostly novels. The the thing that helped me actually get to the point where I could put a full story together, oddly enough, started with D&D. I was playing with a particular group, really enjoying my character, the other characters, and we had these long delays between sessions because of or scheduling reasons. And I just started writing these little farces about side jobs that our characters did. And everyone was appreciated them, and the game master was fine with it because I never gave us more experience or loot. So as long as it's just this little side stuff, the build character, He was fine with that. And around about 2015, I was working 60 to 80 hours a week at my day job that ran into some snags, and we had to pull back to a 40-hour week. And I decided at that point that instead of using the downtime to Netflix and space out, I'd actually make a concerted attempt to write something. And I had enough warning time to come up with some ideas as to what I wanted to write, not a full-fledged outline, but enough to work with. And I used the time to write my first book, which technically is a short novel. I think it was 45,000 words. Um, but the ability to have a beginning, middle, and end in my farces, I was able to port over into a real book. And up until that point in time, I had been a lurker in the size community, um, on the forums, but only observing what other people are saying, keeping track of the artists I followed. But now I had to actually promote my work because that's uh, anyone out there who's a self-published author knows if you don't get your work out there in front of someone's face somehow, it's never going to get anywhere. And so starting to promote my work within the size community um, led me to meeting a number of other people, including Aborigin, who is a great friend and I'm a much better writer than I am. Um, I also was fortunate in the timing that I came in that the first SizeCon was starting up um, in New York City, and I don't live too far away, and I had some friends who live in New York City, and as I was promoting my book, the organizers were looking for people to come in who uh, could have a booth because they were starting up and they wanted to have people who could promote their work there. And I had two books completed and was working on a third when I went. And I met some wonderful people. Um, and this is going down a rabbit hole, and I apologize for all this because it's the way memory works. Um, when I was thinking of things I could do for future size cons to promote my work, um, one of the self-publishing companies that one of the companies I used to do my print books, um, the smallest size book they would make in terms of page count was relatively cheap, and I was debating about uh, doing some samples of work, some short stories, a few chapters from my books, and at that point, I'd started to get more involved with the writers in the community, and I just decided that if I'm going to do something like this, make it a collection of more authors, more diversity, more range of topics, because there are plenty of people out there who, uh, in the community, who aren't into what I'm writing, but there are so many voices, and that's that's what led to me organizing an anthology, and the first one, the small print. This one is not publicly available since I didn't have the resources to pay people for their stories. The agreement was there'd be no profit made from this book. And in the case of this particular one, the promise was made that the Physical copies would only be distributed at SizeCon, and there would be a digital copy made available for the creators who weren't able to attend SizeCon, and there'd be a means to make a link to get a copy of this. Um, and this is sold to authors through a special link for the cost of printing at the company, Lulu. And then a couple years later, uh, did a second version. And the agreement I had with the authors this time was that it would be able to be made publicly available, but again, no profit. So what you're paying for it when you pick it up at Lulu is what Lulu is charging to print it. And there's a link for a free PDF copy that I'll pass along to you. And in the case of this one, this has over 30 separate authors represented and some bits of size from literature. There's a little bit of Gulliver in here. There's a little bit of Gargantua from Rabelais. There's La Giante, the poem. There's Mercutio's speech about Queen Mab from Romeo and Juliet. And that of the things I have done, this is one of the things I'm most proud of because there are a number of writers here at different levels of their ability. There's some who are professionals who have had their work published, and there are many who've never had a chance to have a physical copy of their books, and now they have something physical if they want to pick it up. And I've also given away a few free copies of these at SizeCon, and I plan to give some more away at the upcoming one in 2025. And I apologize for all that plugging, but
Oh no, that's what we're here for, is to talk about books. And I'm so glad you mentioned your anthologies, because that was something I wanted to make sure that we mentioned on the show. And I'll make sure that, that one link is available. So and I think too, that would be useful for other authors as well, to talk about collaboration and cross promotion and finding your people. And what I'm hearing is that, um, of course, we know that that's important with any genre, but especially with something that's rather niche, like the size genre, that a wonderful thing that authors can do is to find other authors who write what they write and to collaborate with them.
I couldn't agree with you more. There are I do have a social media presence on Blue Sky. I can get that link too. And anyone who is interested in writing in the community and wants to get introduced to authors, uh, reach out to me through that. More than happy to talk shop with people who are into my thing or anyone's thing, writing.
Great. I've had an account on Blue Sky for a while, but kind of this week I've just dove in, and yeah, there's an amazing, I've always talked up Mastodon for the writing community, but there's an amazing writing community on Blue Sky. So I will definitely share those links and also make sure we're connected as
Oh yeah,
well.
I'll have to look you up now.
Yeah.
I, I'm terrible with social media. When I was on Twitter actively, uh, I'd go to SizeCon, I'd meet someone and say, "Oh, you're incredible, you're wonderful. I need to follow you on Twitter." And then I go back and find that I've been following him for 6 months to a year, but I just can't connect the name on the screen with the name on the badge.
It's very common, very common. So yeah. Um, I also think that that probably is going to be more important as social media and our marketing efforts get more diluted as we all go to our different places online and that, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Oh,
um, well, like all of my guests, I feel like there's a lot that we could talk about and a lot we could dive into, but we are coming close to the end of our time here. I always like to pose the question, is there something that you wanted to mention about your books or writing that I have not asked or that we have not yet gotten a chance to talk about?
Um, I think in terms of the books and writing, no. I think we can dive into a lot of rabbit holes about so many things. Um, I would like to mention part of the archiving side of things. Uh, I've started something called the Size Library and Museum. It's kind of spread out, and yeah, I know that sounds ostentatious as hell. I apologize, but someone's got to start one, and I've decided to do that. Some of the postcards I've shown you are some small sample of that. Uh, I also have comics, books, uh, I have memorabilia going back to the 1800s at this point. And one thing, uh, before the show, we talked about you being a Star Trek fan. I have, again, I apologize for the glare. This is Star Trek 25 from 1974. It is the second appearance of shrinking in the Star Trek universe. First being Territon incident in the animated series. And it's actually not a bad story for a 1970s comic. They did what a Star Trek comic should do. Tell a story they couldn't have shown on TV and have the characters act pretty much the way they should have. There's a little odd characterization here and there, but for the most part, they knew it. They'd watched the show.
That's always good. My spouse just introduced me to the animated series as we were doing our watch through of Star Trek, and I had never seen it before, and it was fun. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of things to say about it, but I was like, these are things that they couldn't have done on TV at the time, and it was fun.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the effort. I recognize the fact that they didn't have a lot of money, but and you got to appreciate James Doohan getting he's got some good voice work on. He did some good voice work on that show.
Hmm. Definitely. Well, that's a lovely note, I think, to kind of close on. And if there's a link to that museum, not ostentatious at all. If you're collecting it, that's what that is. If there's a link or anything you want to share, have me put in the show notes, just let me know. And again, the links for websites and everything will be in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for being here. I have had a lovely time. I think that this is a really interesting conversation. I'm so glad that we were able to make time to make the connection.
Thank you for having me.